Volcanics are a fan-favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategy that revolves around pyro monsters and Blaze Accelerator in its many forms. While modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelists probably don't realize this, it actually was a pretty competitive strategy at two different points in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. In today's video, I want to talk about Volcanics and some of the times that they had tournament success, and this is going to be divided pretty straight down the middle. You have the early builds of Volcanics way back in 2007, back when they were first released, and then 8 years later you have the new sort of form of Volcanics with Blaze Accelerator Reload, a card that pretty much changed the strategy forever. I'd also like to apologize if I sound tired in today's video because I just got back from YCS Vegas this past weekend, and yes, I'm pretty darn exhausted. It was a lot of fun, but also really tiring, and the time zone change over the past 3 weeks that I've been traveling has just been really hard to keep up on, so I'm sure I'll be back to my normal self shortly, but for now, you just gotta deal with what we have. First off, the main card I want to talk about here is Volcanic Rocket, because while there are many, and I really mean a lot, of really lackluster and terrible Volcanic cards, Volcanic Rocket pretty much has always been the glue that holds this deck together, so it's worth mentioning first. This is a level 4 Fire Pyro monster with 1900 attack points that says, when this card is summoned, so that's normal or flip or special or whatever, you can add one Blaze Accelerator card from your deck or graveyard to your hand. Now, when this card was first released, it only had two search targets. It had the original Blaze Accelerator that we'll talk about in a second, and then it had Tri-Blaze Accelerator. It wouldn't matter until 8 years after this card was released, but please keep in mind this does not add a Blaze Accelerator spell to your hand, but just any Blaze Accelerator card. But for now, let's focus on the card that you were originally searching with Volcanic Rocket. Blaze Accelerator, a continuous spell card that says you can target one monster your opponent controls, send one Pyro-type monster with 500 or less attack from your hand to the graveyard, and if you do destroy that target, you cannot declare an attack during the turn you activate this effect. Now, by modern standards, and even by standards 10 years ago when Volcanics first came out, this card was not very good. I'm not going to stretch the truth here and say this card was amazing. It was pretty good though, only because you could search it for free with Rocket, and Rocket not only searches from deck, but also from the graveyard, so you only had to play one copy. The main thing you were trying to discard with this, especially back in the day, was Volcanic Shell. Now, Volcanic Shell has been good in all versions of Volcanics, and it was the best card in the old school version as well. This thing is not very effective on the board, but while in the hand, you can discard it with the Blaze Accelerator to pop an opponent's monster. That's pretty good, but also Volcanic Shell continuously replaces itself by paying 500 life points to add another copy to your hand. That is a soft once per turn effect, not a hard once per turn effect, so you can keep doing it for every single copy that you put in the graveyard, and there are some pretty cool ways that you can recycle this card as well, not the least of which is Royal Firestorm Guards. This thing is like a pot of avarice on legs. You shuffle back 4 Pyro monsters to draw 2 cards, and that's really good in Volcanics. It wasn't as popular way back in the day, but it was still an option. You can cycle through the Shell or the Rocket. This might surprise you if you're only used to the more modern version of Volcanics with Reload and Scattershot, but back in the day this card wasn't nearly as popular in Volcanics. You really just didn't have that many ways to get Pyro monsters in the graveyard fast, and you also could just play regular Pot of Avarice, although worth mentioning, right now at least you can play Pot of Avarice once again. This card was good in the 2015 version, as we'll talk about in a second, but the original version very often didn't play this card even though it was an option. So for a while, the only Volcanic cards you ever saw actually at competitive events were Rocket, Shell, and Reload. This very small engine, comprised usually of just 6 cards, 2 Rockets, 1 Reload, and 3 Shell, was sort of a supplemental engine to other decks like Monarchs or Plants or something along those lines. The Shell would sometimes see play in Gem Knight decks because there was a recyclable Pyro monster that you could use for some of your Gem Knight fusions, but in terms of actual competitive play, these cards didn't see a lot of it outside of Monarchs and sometimes Plants, even making it all the way to top 4 of a YCS. Shell was often used for discard effects like Lightning Vortex or Regeki Break, but eventually as more and more decks got cards that could add things to your hand, it wasn't really necessary to splash into other strategies. It wouldn't be until 8 years later, when people had long forgotten about the Volcanic deck, when they got a new card, Blaze Accelerator Reload, and this really changed everything, and this is what a lot of people think about when they think about Volcanics in 2020. Reload is a continuous trap card that says, this card's name becomes Tri-Blaze Accelerator while in the spell and trap card zone. Almost irrelevant, but still kinda cool, just in case you want to play Volcanic Doomfire for some strange reason. During either player's main phase, you can send one Volcanic card from your hand to the graveyard, and if you do, draw one card. You can only use this effect of reload once per turn. It's a hard one per turn, of course. During either player's main phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard, send one volcanic card from your deck to the grave. This thing is incredibly powerful. I should know, I actually played Volcanics back in 2015 when this card first came out, and I was really excited for the strategy. Obviously, this thing is searchable with Rocket, and that is a huge deal. It makes Rocket even better, but it gives you a ton of free cards. It's like a ridiculous amount. So if you open just Rocket and Shell, you can get so many draws and so many searches. It's really incredible, especially for 2015. So you summon Rocket, search reload, that's a free +1, and then on your opponent's turn, once you've set the reload, you can discard the Shell to draw another card. That in and of itself isn't necessarily a plus, but on your next turn, you can search another copy of Shell, discard that one to draw a second card, and then search another, the last copy of Shell. That is a lot of draws and a lot of searching, and it really digs you towards the better cards in your deck, usually a lot of traps. Where this got extremely absurd though was Volcanic Scattershot, a card previously no one really cared about. This is a Pyro monster, of course, 500 attack, of course, that says if this card is sent to the graveyard, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. If this card is sent to the graveyard by an effect of a Blaze Accelerator card, like Reload, of course, you can send 2 Volcanic Scattershots from your hand and or deck to the graveyard, destroy all monsters your opponent controls. This is insane because it makes Reload a Regeki on your opponent's turn that inflicts 1500 damage to them, which is really helpful because in general the Volcanic deck doesn't have a lot of big monsters. You have the Rocket, you have the guards, but it was always about controlling your opponent with trap cards, not so much big monster cards, so Scattershot was really important for closing the life point gap. The graveyard effect was also extremely valuable, not only for using Scattershot on your opponent's turn without this card being on the field or without even drawing the Scattershot, but also just for helping the overall consistency, because if you already had a Scattershot in your hand, you could then just send like a Shell to your grave and get a free +1. A lot of people played Magic Planter to send this card to the grave and get 2 free draws, so already you can see how this deck won most of its games. It wasn't won with big monster cards, but rather burying the opponent in card advantage. You had the Rocket that was a +1, you had the Reload drawing cards, and the Shell searching itself, and a Scattershot wiping out the board. You even had Magic Planter drawing cards, and the Royal Firestorm guards recycling your cards and drawing more things, and it was just a lot of cards, especially for 2015. I mean, you had Necros running around, but Volcanics actually could keep up with the best, and I think the first big moment that people realized they were a viable strategy was at YCS South Carolina back in 2015. One player managed to go 10-0 in Swiss, not dropping a single match, and then made it into the top 32 of that event. Unfortunately, he did not make it further into Top Cut, but it was still a really big deal, and I remember that deck profile very fondly. You also had a Volcanic Hero list and a Germany YCS, that was really exciting, and you even had a Necros Volcanics list at the 150th YCS, and that was a super sort of left field strategy that used the Volcanics in combination with the Necros to get so many more free cards. So while Volcanics were never really a meta strategy, they did take a few YCS Top Cut finishes, which is really nice, as well as a bunch more regional top 8s. I mean, these things were destroying regionals left and right. It was a really good time to be a Volcanic fan, and you had all the cards in beautiful max rarity, the secret Rockets, the secret Firestorm guards, the ulti Shells. Those cards were extremely expensive. They went from like $10 to $50 overnight. It was actually pretty incredible. But even past that, you had Volcanics being played up until like 2017 in Paleozoics. Paleozoic Marilla can send Reload to the graveyard, and then you can banish that for Scattershot, giving a Paleozoic deck a Regeki on the opponent's turn. While it's not really the old Volcanics that we're used to with Rocket and Shell and all that stuff, it was still cool to see the Volcanic engine, at least in some capacity, being played even up until a couple years ago. Volcanics are still a fan favorite deck, as the comment section on any video where they're mentioned would show, but it would still be nice to get some more support. I don't think that's too much to ask for. Just in general, the Pyro type is pretty undervalued by Konami. We don't get a lot of support for that subtype, so it'd be pretty cool if we got more archetype cards for Volcanics, one of the best themes for Pyro monsters. I'm not entirely sure how likely that is to happen, but it would be pretty cool and a really nice way to give more legacy support to a deck that was already revitalized once by previous legacy support. The main issue right now, at least, and pretty much for the last couple of years, has been that Volcanics really lack a win condition or a lot of monster cards. Reload and Rocket and Shell and Scattershot are all pretty decent cards even by 2020 standards, but there's just not enough of a backbone to really make a deck around. If you really want to play Volcanics in 2020, you'd probably play that small engine in a Frog Paleozoic deck, but that doesn't really feel like playing an actual Volcanic deck. It rather just feels like playing Frog Paleos with a small Volcanic engine. That's pretty cool, and I'm glad to see Volcanics are at least still somewhat competitively viable. I mean, not really, but at least they're playable in one deck. But if you want to play like a real pure volcanic deck list like people were able to back 5 years ago, well, you wouldn't really be able to do that in 2020. They need more monster cards, they need more modern support, and hopefully Konami will give them some more legacy support in the future. Anyway though, hope you guys enjoyed today's discussion video on Volcanics. I love this deck a lot, as you guys can probably tell. I used to be a huge fan of it way before Altergeist even, and it's just one of my favorite strategies out there. I still have all of my max rarity volcanic cards, so you've probably seen me profile in a couple decks in the past. I'll see you guys later though. Thank you so much for watching today's discussion video on Volcanics. Goodbye.